Down through history, this proverb has been minimized to describing the perfect wife. If that's what you're looking for, you'll certainly find her tucked away in these verses. But Proverbs 31 is so much more than that. It is a detailed description of all that a woman can be. It's an artist's rendering of the portrait of the ultimate woman, of all she is capable of and all she can attain. Welcome to our study of Proverbs 31. I'm Jeannie, and I'm excited to walk through this proverb with you. In this study, we're going to find a very interesting woman. I fell in love with her the first time I heard her described, and since that time I was old enough to study her on my own. She has been my idol, my example, the benchmark for who I believe all women are capable of becoming. I want to give you a little background before we begin our study. Proverbs are short sayings that offer general truth, a little advice, or a piece of wisdom. The book of Proverbs, which is found in the Old Testament, has 31 chapters of such sayings, and a man named King Solomon is credited for writing most of the words. There's another book in the Old Testament that I would like to point out, and it comes just before the book of Proverbs. It's called the book of Psalms. Now, Proverbs and Psalms are similar, but they're different. Psalms are songs and poetry, praises and prayers. One of the most well-known is the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. King David is credited for writing several of these. Who is King David? Well, we first learn about David as a shepherd boy, taking care of his father's flock. He's also the lad that walked out into the middle of the battlefield to face a giant named Goliath. He killed him with only a slingshot and a few stones. Years pass and he becomes king, and he is called a man after God's own heart. But while he is king, he makes some messes. He screws up quite a bit. And one of those times was when he saw a woman named Bathsheba bathing on her roof, and he knew that he had to have her. And it just so happened that she was married, and David felt a little guilty about that, and then he justified having her husband killed while he was fighting in battle for the honor of his king, which also just happened to be David. King Solomon is the son of King David and Bathsheba. David wrote words of songs and poetry, praises and prayers, and his son writes words of wisdom. Don't think for a moment that there is anything in your past or present that God can't use. He is capable of taking all of our messes and turning them into wisdom. And the Bible is filled with such stories. But we need to get back to our study and back to the book of Proverbs. So chapter 31 is that final chapter in this little book. Described in its pages is a remarkable woman, and I call her Moxy. She is a force of character, determination, courage, and nerve. Who wouldn't want to be her? In this study, it is not intended to create more to-do lists in our life. Who needs any more of those? Most of us have enough to-do lists to last 9 lifetimes. Instead, this is a study of building character, developing habits, and creating relationships that will allow us to become the person we desire to be. It is possible to rush through this study in a month. Some could tackle it in a week. But it takes time to build character. It requires patience to understand who we are and what makes us tick. So I encourage you to take a lesson a week and study it. Let it saturate your mind and your heart. Let it penetrate your soul. Only then will it have the power to truly change you. And only then will you begin to see the amazing person that you are and the amazing accomplishments that you have yet to achieve. Our study is divided into 20 sections, and in each section we're going to examine this woman. More importantly, we're going to examine our own lives, not to amplify our failures, but rather to mend some of the parts that are broken, and to develop our undeveloped character. to grow into women that we are capable of being. There is a workbook available which follows each lesson and offers plenty of room for notes and discoveries. The workbook is $7 and is available at asilverthread.com. Now, let's begin our study. I can't wait to introduce you to Moxy. Lesson 1, The Queen Mum. The verse reads this: the words of Lemuel the king, a prophecy that his mother taught him. The translation: a king is recording a description of what his mother, the Queen Mum, has taught him of the perfect woman. The entire book of Proverbs is credited to the writing of King Solomon except for 2 chapters, and this one happens to be one of those chapters. King Lemuel is about to give us a detailed description of the ideal woman. Where does he get this information from? His mom. Now, in our day and time, queens and princes are not very common, so the image that comes to my mind is Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles. But to be very honest with you, I'm glad they didn't write this proverb. I said in the beginning that this proverb has been minimized to describe the perfect wife. I want to make that statement very sincerely. The ideal wife comes out of the 50s television era where moms wear beautiful gingham dresses, unless they didn't have a tiny waist, and then they wore frumpy cotton dresses and headbands and slippers. And somehow Proverbs 31 got forced into this 50s mold, and it's stayed there ever since. But it's time to break that mold. When we look at Proverbs 31 as a blueprint for building character and developing habits of success, it becomes a proverb that speaks to everyone, men and women. And it meets us in our current world of unconventional relationships, of independence, and a world where anyone can wear gingham or cotton. And as I look at the first stanza, I am already filled with questions. How did she teach this? Undoubtedly, it was not a one-time lesson. It wasn't one of those, son, come and sit down here for a moment and let me tell you something. If that had been, this conversation would have been lost in the abundance of knowledge a king has to possess. So was it taught in only word? I rather doubt that. Did the Queen Mum have a class in finding the perfect woman? She may have. Was it in his curriculum, taught to him by his tutors when he was a young prince? You know, rarely lessons taught in word alone are remembered in such detail, and even more rarely thought important enough to write down. So we need to ask, was the Queen Mum a living example of such a woman? I think most likely she was. And did her words match her actions? I'm guessing they did. Did her actions match her character? If it was important enough for her to teach to her son, I would think they were her own character. And did the Queen Mum live them? Was she a living example of the woman that we find in Proverbs 31? You know, actions can nullify a lifetime of words in just an instant. You can diligently teach your children to talk kindly and don't yell and be respectful, but when they're driving you absolutely crazy in the middle of a grocery store and you yell out, knock it off, or hey kid of mine, stop it, you somehow have watered down that message of talking kindly and not yelling and being respectful. And you can claim that you respect authority, but when you are relieved that the police officer you just passed didn't pull you over even though you were doing 20 miles over the speed limit, respecting authority looks different. Who we are speaks volumes over what we say. Little Lemuel must have witnessed his mum being these words. As he grew, she must have opened her heart to him, showing him the type of partner he deserved, the type of person she longed for him to find. It's time for some discussion, for some evaluation, and for some consideration. During this study, we're going to look at who we are, which includes our past and our present for both make up who we are today. When we look at our past, it is not to blame or to find excuses. Rather, it's to help us to understand where some of our missing pieces may have been lost, and in doing so, allow us to become complete. So there are two words that I want us to consider. The first word is connectedness, and the second is consistency. These two characteristics are essential in building a strong character. Defining connectedness is easy to do when we define its opposite, disconnect. You'll never see a sunset by looking east. Something is disconnected in that thinking, and no matter how hard you concentrate, you'll never make the sun rise in the west. That's just disconnected thinking. How absurd these examples are, but it's how we think sometimes. We want to lose weight, but we don't cut out our McDonald's or our snacks or our donuts or our pizza. And we find it impossible to have any time to work out. But then we wonder why the scale never moves. We get so frustrated that our money disappears, that we never have enough. But we never set up a budget. We don't track it. We don't learn to control it. Our thinkings and our actions are disconnected. I recall when our son was young, we called him the in-a-minute kid, and that nickname came from his response to us when we called his name. Ron, can you come here? In a minute. One day I was working in the kitchen making dinner. He was in the living room playing with his very important Legos, and he called my name, and without thinking, those words just spilled right out of my mouth, and I yelled back, in a minute, and it stopped me in my tracks. I was saying in a minute because my hands were dirty. I had to finish whatever it was that I was cutting. I needed then to clean up, and then I could go help him. So the response was okay, in a minute. I knew that I needed to change my instruction to him. I needed to get some consistency in what I was expecting of him and what I was expecting his responses to be. So some things changed in me immediately. I realized that it wasn't fair for me just to call him and think that every time I called, he would come running. Because there were little things in his life like Legos that meant very little to me, but were his world. And if I needed time to finish my project when he called me, I needed to give him time to finish his things. So my calling him changed. I no longer just yelled out his name. I clarified it. When you're finished with that, can you come? Or I'm going to need your help. So can you finish up and come help me? And if I really, really, really needed him, then I made it a sense of urgency so that he knew. And on the flip side, he needed to respond different. Hey, Mom, I'm just finishing up and I'll be right there. Hey, Mom, I heard you. I'm coming. Our conversation, our interaction needed to change. It needed to be consistent. It needed to be connected. I think all the time of the example of sharing. We teach our children to share and we expect them to share everything, even their most precious toys. And yet us as adults, we don't live in that world. We don't leave our keys in our car so that someone can share it with us. We don't leave our purse open in a restaurant so that someone can share it with us. We have learned to take care and respect our personal belongings. When we're dealing with children, we need to understand what their personal belongings are and help to develop that character within them. We need to be connected. There are so many things on a daily basis that we are just disconnected. We don't think it through. It doesn't make sense. We need to learn to get our actions and our words connected. The second word is consistency. Consistency is when we do something the same numerous times, over and over and over again. It's described with words like I'm always or she never. Many of us are consistent, but not in positive ways. We are consistently late or consistently forgetful, consistently lost, and consistently unorganized. The great news is that we've got the action right. We are consistent. We just need to adjust the behaviors a little bit. So let's take a moment at the beginning of our study to give a little definition to ourselves. Now, this may be a challenge to some, and yet others will be able to spit these 3 descriptive words out in a second. There are no wrong answers here, so take some time, think it through, and be honest. What are 3 words that describe you? Write them down, and then date the page. If you don't have a workbook, put your answers somewhere safe for future use. The Queen Mum obviously set an example, so we need to ask ourselves, what example do I set? And what message do I send to those around me? No matter where we are in life, if you're single or married, involved, if you have children or don't have children, if you feel like you have it all or possibly feel like you've lost it all, your actions exemplify who you are. And I challenge you to spend some time asking yourself, what example do I set? What message do I send those around me? This includes family and friends and coworkers. Who are you at work? Who are you at home? Who are you when you're with friends? Are there 3 different people living inside of you? And if so, are there consistencies between them? Perhaps none of those personas are the real you. Is the real you hiding behind the work you, or the home you, or the friend you? Is she longing to get out, but she's too afraid? If so, you're not alone. But it's time to find out who she is. It's time to help her break through the boundaries that keep her hidden. Back to our 2 words once again, connectedness and consistency. Is the example we set and the message we send consistent with who we really are? As we think about the person we display at work or at home with friends, it would be very interesting to know, how would they describe you? I wonder what their 3 descriptives would be. Would they match your 3? Would there be some surprises? If you're curious about their descriptions of you, I would caution you to approach this very carefully. Be prepared. You may hear something you really aren't ready to hear, that you don't want to hear, that could make you angry. So proceed with caution. But we aren't required to get their opinion. This study is meant to focus on ourselves, to develop our own character, not what others think of us. It is time to be just a little selfish and a little protective. Now, there's going to be plenty of time to include them later, but right now I give you permission to be the most important person in the room. So jot down words that you think your partner or your children or your coworker would use to describe you. Then look at your list. Are there consistencies? Are they disconnected? It was interesting to me to read that it has not yet been discovered who this King Lemuel was, or where he reigned as king. That fact interests me most. It excites me. Somewhere in history, a woman taught her son about relationships, about character. She showed him what good looks like, and her example has set a bar that countless have tried to attain. A woman from nowhere has been acknowledged everywhere and lives in Proverbs 31. We all have the potential to influence our children, our community, our world, and generations to come. The prayer I leave with you this week is this: Gracious God, help us to connect our past to our present, allowing us to create our future, and gently point out our inconsistencies. Teach us how to live a life that is consistent with who we are, who we desire to be, and who you have created us to be. Thank you for joining me in this first lesson. Moxy and I are so excited that you've joined us as we become women clothed in strength and dignity and can laugh without fear of the future. If you're starting this journey, I would love to hear from you. You can connect with me in 2 ways. You're going to be able to find me at my website, which is www.jeanniegb.com, or you can email me directly. The email address is moxy@asilverthread.com. I look forward to meeting you, hearing from you, and walking through this journey with you. Until next time.